At 2 a.m., the Seattle City morgue smells exactly like what it is: industrial bleach, cold steel, and the quiet metallic scent of stalled blood. I prefer it that way. It is predictable. The dead do not complain about the weather, they do not ask for favors, and most importantly, they do not lie. Or at least, they usually do not. The John Doe on table 3, however, was keeping secrets. I stood over his open chest cavity, the steady rhythm of Seattle's relentless November rain, lashing against the frosted, reinforced windows high above. My scalpel paused. Just beneath the cartilage of his trachea, nestled in a pocket of necrotic tissue, was something that biology had not put there. I set the scalpel down with a quiet clink on the metal tray. Using a pair of fine-tipped forceps, I reached into the incision and pulled it free. It was a microchip, barely the size of a grain of rice encased in a bio-inert polymer casing. No serial numbers, no medical identification tags, just a smooth black piece of highly sophisticated hardware hidden inside a dead man's throat. I did not even have time to place it in an evidence vial. The low, constant hum of the morgue's HVAC system died abruptly. A split second later, the blinding overhead fluorescent lights snapped off. Total suffocating darkness swallowed the room. The backup generators did not kick in. That was not a glitch. That was a localized grid cut. My heart did not pound, it simply stopped for a fraction of a second. I stepped backward away from the stainless steel table, just as the heavy reinforced double doors of the morgue did not just open, they groaned and gave way under a concussive structural breach. Two muffled thuds echoed as suppressed gunfire broke the silence, providing the distinct muffled cough of professional-grade weaponry. Two muzzle flashes cut through the pitch black, illuminating the silhouettes of 3 men in heavy tactical gear sweeping into my morgue. The first bullet shattered the glass of the specimen cabinet to my right. The second bullet found me. It was not a direct hit. It grazed the top of my left shoulder, a blindingly hot, sharp tear through fabric and flesh. The impact spun me around, and my knees hit the freezing linoleum floor hard. I slid backwards, scrambling into the narrow, dark space beneath the autopsy table, pulling my legs tight against my chest. I pressed my right hand against my left shoulder. It came away wet, warm, and slick. I was bleeding. Adrenaline flooded my system, but my immediate, entirely irrational thought was not a prayer for survival. It was a spike of pure, unadulterated annoyance. My shirt. It was a custom-tailored Egyptian cotton button-down. $200 ruined in a fraction of a second by a stray 9mm round. Blood is notoriously alkaline. It sets into fine cotton fibers almost immediately. The sheer disrespect of getting shot in designer clothing was staggering. Heavy boots stepped onto the linoleum. 3 distinct sets of footsteps, organized, spaced out. They were not here to rob the city morgue. They were here for the microchip currently gripped in the forceps on the table directly above my head. And professional cleaners do not leave witnesses behind to fill out police reports. I needed to move. I reached into my left trouser pocket, wincing as the torn muscle in my shoulder screamed in protest. I pulled out my phone, immediately pressing it flat against my thigh to hide the glare of the screen. My fingers were slick with my own blood. The biometric scanner failed to read my thumbprint. My first attempt failed. I wiped my thumb frantically on my slacks, leaving a dark smear across the fabric. My second attempt was successful. I needed Miller. Detective Miller, Seattle PD. We had been friends for a decade. He was the only person I trusted with the kind of trouble that arrived with suppressed weapons at 2 a.m. He was my speed dial number 2. I just needed to hit the button, and half the precinct would light up this miserable alley in less than 4 minutes. The boots were getting closer, 10 feet away, 8 feet. My bloody thumb slipped across the smooth glass of the screen. I pressed the contact icon blindly and brought the phone tight to my ear, holding my breath so completely my lungs burned. 1 ring. That was standard. 2 rings. Miller usually answered on the first ring when he was working the night shift. 3 rings. The line finally opened. There was no frantic Seattle PD or Miller speaking. There was only silence. Then breathing. It was low even and entirely unhurried. It was the kind of breathing that belonged to a person who was not afraid of the dark because they were the scariest thing in it. Did you ruin someone else's carpet again? The voice was deep gravelly and carried a weight that most men spent their entire lives trying to fake. The chill that ran down my spine instantly froze the blood in my veins. It had nothing to do with the freezing floor or the bullet wound. I pulled the phone away from my ear just enough to look at the illuminated screen in the dark. I had not hit speed dial 2. In my blind, bloody panic, my finger had slipped. I had hit speed dial 1, the emergency contact I had not used and had not possessed the psychological strength to delete in 3 long years. Vance. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the phone back to my ear as the boots stopped right in front of the autopsy table, hiding me. Vance, I whispered, my voice tight with pain and a very specific kind of despair. I need you to come get me. 12 minutes. That is exactly how long it takes for a person to fully accept their own mortality, process the 5 stages of grief, and loop back around to sheer, unadulterated irritation. I stayed curled beneath the stainless steel table, my right hand applying desperate pressure to my torn left shoulder. The 3 men were methodical. They did not shout. They communicated in sharp, hand-signal gestures and the occasional sweep of a high-lumen tactical flashlight. They were checking the cold lockers. It was only a matter of time before they checked the floor. 11 minutes and 45 seconds. A beam of white light swept across the linoleum, stopping 3 feet from my designer shoes. The heavy boots pivoted toward me. At exactly 12 minutes, the exterior wall of the Seattle City morgue ceased to exist. It was not an explosion. It was raw kinetic brutality. A matte black, heavily armored SUV simply drove through the reinforced frosted glass and cinder block wall like it was constructed of wet tissue paper. The concussive boom of the impact sent a shockwave through the floor, raining shards of safety glass and pulverized concrete across the room. The vehicle's high beams cut through the swirling dust, blinding the 3 assassins. The driver's side door did not just open, it was kicked out. Vance stepped into the morgue. 3 years had not softened a single edge on him. He was dressed in full tactical black, no insignia, no armor plates, just the sleek, functional gear of a man who considered Kevlar an admission of self-doubt. He did not draw a weapon immediately. He did not need to. He moved with that terrifying, unhurried fluid grace that I had spent 36 months trying very hard to forget. The closest assassin raised his suppressed rifle. Vance did not flinch. He stepped inside the man's guard, his left hand deflecting the barrel upward, while his right hand delivered a brutal percussive strike to the man's larynx. The crunch was audible over the idling engine of the SUV. 1 down. The second man fired. The bullet sparked uselessly against the armored hood of the SUV. Vance fluidly drew a matte black sidearm from his thigh holster and returned a single mathematically precise shot to the man's center of mass. 2 down. The third assassin was smarter. He dropped his rifle, drawing a jagged combat knife, and lunged. Vance caught his wrist, twisting it with a sickening sound as the bone gave way, and hooked his other arm around the man's head, preparing to snap his neck. "You're doing it wrong." The words ripped out of my throat before my brain could stop them. Both Vance and the struggling assassin froze, looking down at the dark space beneath the autopsy table. I glared back, my bloody hand clutching my shoulder. "You're torquing the jaw. That's just going to paralyze him and leave me with a mountain of paperwork." 45-degree angle down toward the C3 vertebra. "If you're going to kill someone in my lab, do it cleanly." In the dim light of the high beams, I saw Vance roll his eyes. It was a subtle, profoundly arrogant gesture. He adjusted his grip, shifted his weight, and applied pressure at a perfect 45-degree angle. A sharp crack echoed as the neck bone gave way. The third man crumpled to the floor. 3 down. Elapsed time since wall breach 40 seconds. Vance holstered his weapon, the metallic click echoing loudly in the sudden quiet. He stepped over the body, his heavy combat boots crunching on broken glass, and crouched down to my eye level. He looked at me. He really looked at me. His gaze swept over my pale face, the blood soaking through my $200 shirt, and the trembling I was trying desperately to suppress. His jaw tightened a microscopic shift that most people would miss, but I was not most people. It was not pity. It was a tightly coiled, lethal kind of control. Then he opened his mouth. "You look like a wet stray cat, Julian," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that vibrated right in my chest. "I leave you alone for 3 years, and you can't even keep your clothes clean. And you just drove a 3-ton tank through a municipal building." I shot back, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Do you have any idea how many forms I have to fill out for structural damage?" "Can you walk?" he asked, completely ignoring my complaint. Not a performance of calm, actual calm. "I've been shot, Vance, not lobotomized. Of course I can walk." I tried to scramble out from under the table, my left leg, having apparently decided to join the union of things currently betraying me, buckled. Vance caught me before I hit the floor. His grip on my uninjured arm was absolute, an anchor dropped in the middle of a hurricane. He did not ask for permission. He simply hauled me up his broad chest, a solid wall against my side. He smelled like rain gun oil and something dark and familiar that made my throat dangerously tight. The chip, I gasped, pointing to the metal tray on the table. Vance snatched the forceps, pocketing the microchip without a word. He practically carried me to the passenger side of the SUV, tossing me onto the expensive leather seat. Outside the breached wall, the distant rising wail of police sirens began to cut through the heavy Seattle downpour. More were coming. The people who sent these cleaners would not stop at 3. Vance climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the vehicle into reverse. The SUV tore out of the morgue, its tires squealing against the wet asphalt as we plunged into the labyrinth of the city's rain-slicked industrial district. I leaned my head back against the headrest, closing my eyes as the adrenaline crash hit me like a physical blow. The heater blasted warm air over my freezing skin. To my left, the man I had sworn to hate for the rest of my natural life was steering a bullet-riddled tank through the night. I'd managed to escape the Reaper's scythe, only to willingly jump straight into the jaws of a wolf. And the most terrifying part was not that I was bleeding in the passenger seat of a wanted man's car. The terrifying part was that for the first time in 3 years, I actually felt safe. Vance navigated the labyrinth of Seattle's industrial sector with the muscle memory of a man who spent entirely too much time hiding bodies. The rain was coming down in blinding sheets now, washing the blood from the armored hood of the SUV. In the passenger seat, I was busy trying to keep my soul inside my body. The bullet graze on my shoulder throbbed with a sickening, heavy rhythm, matching the erratic beat of my heart. If I bleed out on your imported leather upholstery, I rasped, gripping my torn shirt, I want my headstone to read, "Survived the assassins died because his ex-boyfriend drove like a maniac." Vance did not look at me. His eyes were locked on the rearview mirror. "You're not going to bleed out from a superficial graze, Julian. Stop being dramatic. And I'm driving like this because we picked up a tail 3 blocks ago." I forced my heavy eyelids open and looked at the side mirror. 2 pairs of headlights were cutting through the rain, maintaining a precise, aggressive distance. More cleaners. Vance jerked the steering wheel, throwing the heavy SUV into a brutal drift through an open chain-link gate and into the cavernous belly of an abandoned shipping warehouse. He slammed on the brakes, the vehicle skidding to a halt on the slick concrete. "Get out," he ordered, already unbuckling his harness and drawing his weapon. "Move toward the back office, keep your head down, and let you have all the fun hardly." I stumbled out of the car. The warehouse smelled of wet dust, decaying concrete, and rusted iron. It looked like tetanus materialized into architecture. The 2 pursuit vehicles screeched into the warehouse entrance, their high beams sweeping the dark interior. Doors flew open. Heavily armed men poured out. Vance took cover behind a concrete pillar, returning fire with measured deadly precision. I scrambled behind a stack of wooden pallets. I did not have a gun, and even if I did, my aim was purely anatomical, not tactical. But my eyes darted around the shadows, landing on a neglected corner of the warehouse. 50-pound bags of calcium hypochlorite industrial pool shock. Next to it, a rusted 50-gallon drum, leaking what smelled distinctly like polyethylene glycol commercial brake fluid. My inner chemist smiled, a very dark, very vindictive smile. "Vance!" I yelled over the deafening crack of gunfire. "Shoot the overhead crane pulley. Drop those pallets of cinder blocks on them." Vance did not question it. He adjusted his aim and fired 3 rapid shots into the rusted iron mechanism suspended high above the assassins. The mechanism shrieked, snapped, and dropped 2 tons of cinder blocks directly onto the hood of the lead pursuit vehicle. The assassins scattered, diving for cover. That was all the time I needed. Ignoring the agonizing tear in my shoulder, I lunged toward the corner, grabbed a jagged piece of rebar, and slashed open 3 bags of the pool shock, dumping the white powder directly into the pooling puddle of brake fluid. "Vance, fall back!" I screamed, sprinting toward the rear office. Vance broke cover and ran toward me. 3 seconds later, the organic compound reacted with the highly reactive oxidizer. It was not a cinematic explosion. It was a violent, blinding eruption of intense thermal energy and a massive cloud of highly toxic chlorine gas. A wall of white-hot fire roared toward the ceiling, completely barricading the entrance and sending the surviving assassins into fits of choking panic. Vance grabbed my good arm, yanking me through the door of the back office and slamming it shut. He stared at the flickering orange light creeping under the door frame, then slowly turned to look at me. He was breathing hard, a smear of grease across his sharp jawline. "You just built a chemical weapon out of pool supplies," he said. His tone was deadpan, but there was a dark, terrifying glint of pride in his eyes. "I have a doctorate in forensic pathology. I adjusted my ruined collar with my bloody hand. I know how to take bodies apart. Putting them together is a courtesy. Now, where is the exit?" Vance did not point to a back door. Instead, he walked over to a grimy electrical panel on the wall, flipped a sequence of switches, and pressed his palm against a hidden biometric scanner. The floor beneath us shuddered. A section of the concrete slid back, revealing a pristine, brightly lit steel elevator. "After you," he said. I frowned, but stepped inside. The elevator descended smoothly, silently, taking us deep underground. When the doors finally hissed open, I stepped out a sarcastic comment on the tip of my tongue. The words died in my throat. I was not standing in a cold concrete fallout shelter. I was standing in a living room, hardwood floors, exposed brick walls, a mid-century modern leather sofa. To my left, a kitchen equipped with a ridiculous $3,000 Italian espresso machine. It was an exact, meticulous, one-to-one replica of the apartment we had shared in Brooklyn 3 years ago. My breath hitched. I walked forward as if in a trance, moving toward the bathroom. I pushed the door open. Sitting on the marble counter right next to the sink was a brand new, unopened tube of Le Labo Bergamote 22 hand cream, the exact absurdly expensive brand I used to complain about buying. I turned around. Vance was leaning against the door frame, his dark eyes watching my every movement, his face an unreadable mask. "You are clinically insane," I whispered. "This is psychopathic. You dumped me on a Tuesday in the rain, told me I was a liability, and then you built a subterranean museum of our relationship in Seattle." Sit down on the island counter. Vance ignored my accusation, walking toward a cabinet and pulling out a matte black medical kit. "You need stitches, and I don't have local anesthesia." I did not argue. My legs were shaking too much to stand anyway. I hopped onto the kitchen island. Vance stepped between my knees, his tall frame completely invading my personal space. He unbuttoned my ruined shirt with deft, clinical efficiency, pulling it off my left shoulder. He did not hesitate. He threaded the curved surgical needle and pierced my skin. I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a scream. Vance's hands, usually instruments of absolute violence, were steady and shockingly gentle. I looked down at him. I could smell the gunpowder on his skin beneath it, the faint scent of cedar and rain. "Why did you build this, Vance?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave, the anger suddenly giving way to a dangerous, aching curiosity. He pulled the suture tight, tying off the knot. He did not look up at my face. His thumb, rough and calloused, brushed gently against my collarbone, lingering just a fraction of a second longer than medically necessary. Because Vance said softly, his voice barely more than a vibration in the quiet bunker, I needed to remember what I was killing people to protect. The silence that followed was louder than the explosion upstairs. The boundary I had built over 3 years of bitterness did not just crack, it shattered. The ruthless breakup had been a lie. I was looking at a monster, yes, but for the first time I realized he was my monster. Vance did not offer me a cup of the absurdly expensive espresso, and I did not ask for one. Instead, he plugged the biopolymer microchip into a heavy military-grade decryption terminal sitting on the replica of our old dining table. I stood beside him, clutching a clean towel against my freshly sutured shoulder, watching lines of encrypted code cascade across the black monitor. It took the brute force algorithm exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds to crack the encryption. A spreadsheet materialized on the screen. It was not a hit list. It was a ledger. Columns of offshore routing numbers, dates, and payout amounts tied to the West Coast illicit organ trade. My eyes scanned the names of the recipients. Most were aliases, but the access codes attached to them were terrifyingly familiar. Municipal judges, port authority officials, and right at the top, sitting comfortably in the highest payout bracket, was a name that made the air completely vanish from my lungs. Detective Elias Miller. I stared at the glowing letters. Miller, the man who had been at my graduation, the man who brought cheap beer to my apartment on Thanksgiving, the man I had desperately tried to call 2 hours ago from under a steel autopsy table. He was the leak. I whispered the reality of it settling into my chest like liquid lead. He knew the John Doe was coming to my morgue tonight. He sent the cleaners. Vance did not offer a platitude. He simply ejected the chip and crushed the decryption terminal's hard drive with the butt of his gun. If you had hit speed dial 2, he said, his voice flat, you wouldn't have made it to sunrise. A sudden sharp chime interrupted the heavy silence. Vance's burner phone lit up. He glanced at the screen, and his posture instantly shifted from relaxed vigilance to absolute zero. "Miller just accessed the city's grid," Vance said, moving rapidly toward a hidden weapons cache behind the bookshelf. "He's pinging the GPS module in your phone. They know the general radius of this bunker. We're leaving. Now. I have an extraction boat waiting at Pier 46. 3 minutes later, we were back in the armored SUV tearing through the rain-soaked streets toward the waterfront. The adrenaline was back, burning away the exhaustion, but my mind was stuck on a logistical anomaly. I looked at Vance, his face illuminated by the harsh orange glow of the streetlights flashing by. "The wall at the morgue," I said suddenly. "Not the time, Julian. You didn't just crash blindly. I pressed the pieces, finally clicking together. You hit the exact 12-foot span between the reinforced load-bearing pillars, a foot in either direction, and you would have wrapped this SUV around solid steel. You knew the architectural blueprints." Vance kept his eyes on the slick road, his jaw locked tight. "Drop it." "No," I snapped. "You didn't just look up the blueprints. The city upgraded that facility's security protocols 2 years ago. Those records are classified." The SUV hit a pothole, sending a jolt of pain through my shoulder, but I didn't break my gaze. "How did you know, Vance?" He slammed his hand against the steering wheel. The sudden violence of the gesture made me flinch. "Because I own the damn building, Julian," he roared over the sound of the engine. I froze. "What?" "I bought the municipal lease through a shell company 34 months ago." He snapped, his chest heaving. "I tripled the funding for the perimeter security. I had the HVAC filters upgraded because I know you have mild asthma. And I memorized the structural layout of every building you spend more than 4 hours a day in." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. 3 years ago, the Volkov Syndicate put a bounty on my head." Vance continued, his voice dropping to a low, jagged growl. "They knew I cared about you. You were a walking target. So I didn't leave because you were a liability. I left because I was the liability. I made you hate me so you wouldn't come looking for me when they started shooting." I stared at the ruthless, terrifying man beside me. For 3 years, I had curated a perfect, pristine hatred for him. I had thrown away his things. I had scrubbed my life clean of his memory. And all the while, he had been standing in the shadows, quietly buying the ground I walked on just to make sure it didn't collapse beneath my feet. Before I could formulate a response that encompassed both profound fury and devastating affection, the SUV skidded onto the desolate, fog-choked asphalt of Pier 46. We didn't make it to the boat. Floodlights flared to life from the top of the stacked shipping containers, blinding us. 3 black sedans formed a barricade across the pier. Standing in the pouring rain, holding a megaphone and flanked by heavily armed mercenaries, was Detective Miller. "Turn the engine off," Vance Miller's voice echoed over the crashing waves. "Give me the chip, and I'll make sure Julian's autopsy report says it was quick." Vance did not say a word. He threw the SUV into drive, stomped the gas pedal, and rammed directly into the closest sedan, clearing a narrow path. "Get out, run for the containers," Vance yelled, kicking his door open. I scrambled out into the freezing rain, the air instantly filled with the fucking roar of automatic gunfire. Bullets sparked off the asphalt and the sides of the metal crates, whizzing past my ears like angry hornets. I ran blindly toward the narrow labyrinth of towering shipping containers. I could hear Vance right behind me, his weapon barking in controlled deadly bursts, covering our retreat. We were almost to the alleyway between 2 massive rusted crates when a sudden terrifyingly loud crack split the air. Vance did not cry out. He simply grabbed the back of my collar, violently shoving me forward into the dark, narrow gap between the containers. I stumbled, hitting the corrugated metal wall hard. I spun around just as Vance stepped inside and slammed the heavy iron doors shut behind us, plunging us into absolute pitch-black darkness. "Vance," I breathed my hands, reaching out blindly. My fingers found his tactical vest, tracing downward. They slipped into something hot, wet, and pulsing on his right side. He had taken a bullet. The darkness inside the shipping container was absolute. It wasn't the quiet, clinical dark of a closed morgue locker. It was a suffocating, heavy blackness that smelled of rust-stale seawater and the sharp, metallic tang of fresh blood. Outside, the chaotic symphony of Miller's mercenaries continued, the staccato pop of suppressed rifles, the heavy thud of boots on wet asphalt, and the sweeping beams of flashlights cutting through the narrow gaps of the corrugated steel walls. Inside, there was only the sound of Vance's ragged, wet breathing. I fell to my knees on the cold metal floor, my hands reaching out blindly in the pitch black. My fingers collided with the rigid plates of Vance's tactical vest, frantically tracing the edges until I felt the hot, slick moisture soaking through the ballistic weave at his right flank. "Vance," I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. "Where did it hit? Talk to me." Right side below the ribcage, Vance grunted, shifting his weight against the container wall. The sound of his heavy combat boots scraping the steel floor echoed dangerously loud. "Missed the plate. Barely." My hands moved with the frantic, detached precision of a man who had spent a decade studying exactly how the human body failed. I pressed my fingers into the wound channel, ignoring his sharp hiss of pain. "The blood is warm, but it's flowing, not pulsing," I analyzed, my mind automatically categorizing the trauma. "It's a venous bleed, not arterial. If it had hit your hepatic artery, you'd be dead in 90 seconds. As it stands, it's likely a liver laceration or the ascending colon." In the dark, despite the fact that he was currently leaking vital fluids onto his own boots, Vance let out a low, breathless chuckle. "I take a bullet for you, and you give me an anatomy lecture," he wheezed. "You really know how to ruin a romantic moment, Julian." "Shut up." I snapped my hands, trembling violently as I ripped the bottom half of my ruined designer shirt into strips. "There is absolutely nothing romantic about exsanguination." Press this against the entry wound. Hard. I guided his hand to the makeshift bandage, pressing his palm down with my own. The space between us was non-existent. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, the rapid thumping rhythm of his heart beneath the Kevlar. For 3 years, I had convinced myself that this man was a phantom, a ghost I had exorcised from my life. But right now, bleeding and grounded in the dark, he was terrifyingly mortal. I reached blindly for the tactical pouch on his thigh, searching for the medical kit. As my fingers fumbled with the zipper, Vance's large, calloused hand suddenly snapped out, wrapping around my wrist in an iron grip. "Stop," he ordered. The teasing lilt was completely gone from his voice. It was replaced by that cold, dead calm tone he used right before he broke someone's neck. "Let go of me. I need the hemostatic gauze." "Listen to me." Vance interrupted, pulling me inches from his face. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel his breath on my cheek. "Miller has at least 12 men out there. They're sweeping the alleys. They're going to find this container in less than 2 minutes. Then we wait for the FBI. I pinged my own location to the Seattle field office before we left the bunker. They're coming. They won't get here in time to stop a localized execution," Vance said flatly. I heard a distinct chilling sound. A dull metallic clink echoed inside the container. It was the sound of a safety pin being pulled from an M67 fragmentation grenade. When I kicked these doors open, Vance's voice was a low, mechanical hum, devoid of fear. "I am going to step out. The flash and shrapnel will blind the first wave and create a 40-foot kill zone. You run left. Do not look back. Keep the shipping containers between you and the water until you reach the main street." He was doing it again. He was deciding that his life was the currency required to buy my safety. 3 years ago, he broke my heart to protect me. Tonight, he was going to blow himself to pieces for the exact same reason. The sheer blinding fury that erupted in my chest entirely eclipsed my fear of the men outside. I didn't think. I just reacted. A sharp slap resounded loudly in the darkness. Vance froze. For a man who could anticipate the trajectory of a sniper bullet, he clearly hadn't anticipated an open-handed slap from a forensic pathologist in the pitch black. "You arrogant, controlling, suicidal bastard," I hissed, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it shook my bones. "You do not get to make that choice for me again. If you walk out those doors and blow yourself up, I swear to God, Vance, I will personally claim your remains. I will stitch you back together like a cheap patchwork quilt, and I will embalm you with the absolute cheapest, lowest grade formaldehyde the city budget allows. You will reek of discount preservatives for eternity." Silence fell heavily over the cramped space, save for the muffled shouting outside. Then slowly Vance breathed out. It wasn't a sigh of pain, it was a sound of absolute defeated surrender. "You are the most terrifying creature I have ever met," Vance murmured into the dark. I heard the soft metallic click of the grenade pin being slid back into place. His hand left my wrist and moved up his rough fingers, tracing the line of my jaw, wiping away a smear of his own blood from my cheek. "We do this together," I said, my voice finally dropping to a steady, lethal calm. "We walk out of here together, or neither of us does." Vance didn't argue. He shifted his weight, wincing as he unholstered a heavy, cold piece of metal from his secondary hip rig. He pressed it into my hands. It was a customized Sig Sauer P226. "Safety is off." Chamber is loaded, Vance said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper right against my ear. Aim for the central nervous system, doctor. Let's go show Miller how a proper autopsy is done. I gripped the pistol, the cold steel grounding me. I wasn't just a man who cleaned up the dead anymore. I was ready to make a few of my own. The heavy rusted steel doors of the shipping container were the only things separating us from a firing squad. Outside, the rain hammered against the corrugated metal, a relentless drumbeat masking the sound of approaching boots. I stood beside Vance in the pitch black, the heavy Sig Sauer P226 gripped tightly in my two good hands, though my left shoulder screamed in agonizing protest. Vance leaned against the doorframe, his breathing shallow, but controlled the M67 grenade resecured in his webbing. He had his primary weapon raised, waiting for my cue. They're wearing standard-issue Kevlar, I whispered, visualizing the tactical gear I had seen on the first 3 assassins at the morgue. Level 3A. It stops handgun rounds to the center of mass. Don't waste your bullets on their chests. Noted, Dr. Vance murmured, the ghost of a smirk in his gravelly voice. Where do you suggest I put them? The pelvic girdle, I said with clinical detachment. The iliac arteries are massive and completely unprotected. A hit there drops blood pressure to 0 in under 3 minutes. If you miss, you still shatter the hip bone, eliminating mobility. Failing that, the axillary gap, the armpit. There's no armor there, and it's a direct highway to the heart and lungs. Vance let out a low whistle. Remind me never to argue with you about the thermostat again. Just kick the door, Vance. Vance kicked the latch. The heavy iron door flew open, groaning violently on its rusted hinges. The immediate influx of harsh white light from the mercenaries' flashlights was blinding, but Vance didn't flinch. He moved with a terrifying fluid grace, stepping out of the container and dropping to one knee to minimize his profile. The firefight that erupted was not a battle. It was a morbid, highly choreographed ballet of ballistics and anatomy. 2 targets, 9 o'clock, I shouted over the deafening roar of gunfire, leaning out just enough to act as his spotter. Aim low. Vance fired twice. 2 sharp, concussive cracks. Both mercenaries folded instantly, clutching their shattered pelvises, their rifles clattering uselessly to the wet asphalt. One advancing at 2 o'clock. He's raising his weapon. Take the axillary. Vance pivoted smoothly, the muzzle of his weapon flashing. The mercenary spun wildly as the bullet caught him perfectly under the raised arm, severing the brachial plexus and collapsing his lung. He was dead before he hit the ground. I raised the Sig Sauer, my hands shaking only slightly, and fired 3 rounds to provide covering fire, shattering a floodlight that was pinning us down. The recoil sent a shockwave of white-hot pain through my sutured shoulder, but I swallowed the groan. Within 45 seconds, the overwhelming force Miller had brought to Pier 46 was decimated. The surviving mercenaries, realizing they were outmatched by a ghost and a forensic pathologist treating them like a live-action dissection board, broke rank and fled into the maze of containers. Suddenly, a shadow lunged from behind a stack of wooden crates to our right. It was Detective Miller. His face was contorted in a mask of desperation, his service weapon raised directly at my chest. "You should have just died in the morgue, Julian," he screamed over the rain. He didn't get to pull the trigger. Vance moved faster than humanly possible, ignoring the bullet wound in his own side. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, slapping Miller's gun away with the barrel of his rifle before driving his combat boot squarely into the side of Miller's knee. The joint snapped with a sickening noise that echoed over the waterfront. Miller collapsed, howling in agony. Vance stood over him, the rain washing the blood and soot from his tactical gear. He aimed his weapon directly at the center of Miller's forehead. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Vance, stop," I yelled, stepping out of the container, my own gun lowered. "Don't. The FBI is 3 minutes away. If you put a bullet in a police detective's head, you can never stop running." Vance didn't lower the gun. He kept his eyes locked on the traitor groveling at his feet. "He sent men to kill you, Julian." I know I said, my voice steady, cutting through the chaos. "And I want him to spend the next 30 years in a federal penitentiary, rotting in a 6x8 cell, thinking about it. Killing him is a mercy he hasn't earned." Vance's jaw tightened. For a long, agonizing second, I thought he was going to pull the trigger anyway. But then slowly, he breathed out, engaging the safety and lowering the weapon. He turned away from Miller and walked toward me. The adrenaline was finally beginning to crash, leaving behind the raw, visceral reality of what we had just survived. Vance backed me up against the cold, wet steel of the shipping container, trapping me between his arms. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving against mine. Blood, some belonging to men who would never go home, stained his gear. He looked down at me, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that made the freezing Seattle rain feel like gasoline. "I tried," Vance whispered, his voice jagged and raw. "God knows, Julian, I tried. For 3 years, I stayed in the shadows. I tried to keep you clean. I tried to keep you far away from my world." "You did a terrible job," I replied, my voice shaking, though not from the cold. "I know." He leaned in closer, his forehead resting against mine. The smell of gunpowder rain and him was intoxicating. "But if you're going to insist on jumping into the mud, if you're going to build chemical weapons in warehouses and tell me how to surgically dismantle my enemies." He paused, his hand moving up to cup the back of my neck, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw just below my ear. "Then I am never letting you go again," he vowed, a lethal promise disguised as a confession. "If I go down, I'm dragging you to hell with me." "I just complain about the ambient temperature the whole way down," I breathed. Vance didn't give me a chance to say anything else. He kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was a desperate, fierce collision of teeth and bruising pressure tasting of copper rain and 3 years of suffocated longing. My good hand tangled in the collar of his tactical vest, pulling him closer, ignoring the pain in my shoulder, ignoring the bleeding detective writhing on the asphalt, ignoring the absolute absurdity of the situation. In the distance, the wail of approaching sirens finally breached the perimeter of the pier. The FBI had arrived. Vance broke the kiss, his breathing ragged. He looked over his shoulder at the flashing red and blue lights cutting through the fog, then looked back at me. "I have to go," he said, his tone shifting back to the pragmatic clinical ghost he was born to be. Before I could process the logistics of his escape, Vance's hand moved to my left wrist with practiced speed. In one fluid motion, he unbuckled the leather strap of my Patek Philippe watch, the one I had bought to celebrate my promotion, and slipped it into his pocket. "Hey," I protested momentarily, forgetting the sirens. "That's a $20,000 timepiece." Vance flashed me a brilliant, wicked half-smile as he stepped backward into the shadows of the alleyway. "Collateral," he said, his voice fading into the mist. "I'll see you soon, Doctor." By the time the first armored FBI transport screeched onto the pier, Vance was gone, leaving me standing in the pouring rain, bleeding, missing a very expensive watch, and smiling like an absolute lunatic. 2 months. In forensic pathology, 2 months is exactly the amount of time required for osteoblastic activity to fully fuse a fractured bone, provided there are no secondary infections. It is also, coincidentally, the exact amount of time it takes for a federal prosecutor to dismantle a West Coast organ trafficking syndicate when handed a decrypted ledger and a former police detective with a shattered knee. Miller took a plea deal. He traded the names of 2 municipal judges and a Port Authority commissioner for a transfer to a minimum security federal facility. I read the report while drinking my morning coffee. I also read the addendum filed 3 days later, noting that Miller had been accidentally transferred to a maximum security penitentiary in Colorado, populated heavily by inmates he had personally incarcerated. Bureaucratic errors are a tragic thing. I suspected a certain someone with a god complex and unparalleled hacking skills had a hand in it, but I didn't ask. Life returned to a rhythm, though the melody had fundamentally changed. I was back at the Seattle City morgue. The building had undergone a sudden, incredibly well-funded municipal renovation. The exterior walls were now reinforced with ballistic-grade concrete. The double doors to my lab were solid titanium, secured by a retinal scanner. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The rain was drumming its familiar relentless beat against the frosted glass high above. I was finalizing the toxicology report on a rather uninspired cyanide poisoning when I heard it. A soft tapping sound came from the window. I paused. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the window. A soft tapping sound came from the window again. I walked over to the reinforced glass, hit the automated blind release, and looked out into the freezing Seattle downpour. Hanging upside down from a repelling harness attached to the roof, looking entirely unbothered by the sheer drop or the torrential rain, was Vance. He was wearing his usual tactical black, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, holding up a single arrogant finger to indicate I should open the window. I stared at him for 3 full seconds, sighed, and unlatched the heavy reinforced pane, swinging it inward. Vance unclipped his carabiner with terrifying ease, swung his long legs through the narrow opening, and landed on the linoleum floor without making a single sound. He stood up, shaking the water from his broad shoulders like a massive, lethal stray dog. Do you have any idea how many forms I filled out to upgrade the security of this building? I asked, crossing my arms over my pristine, freshly pressed white lab coat. Just for you to break in through the ventilation shaft and rappel down the exterior wall like a psychotic Batman. The security is flawless against standard threats, Dr. Vance replied, his deep voice vibrating in the quiet room. He stepped closer, his boots leaving wet tracks on my spotless floor. But I am not a standard threat. Furthermore, you reek. I glared at him. It's formaldehyde and phenol. It's a morgue Vance. If you want the scent of lavender and sandalwood, go break into a day spa. I prefer the smell of the morgue, he said smoothly. Less small talk. He reached into the tactical pouch on his chest and pulled out a familiar object, tossing it through the air. I caught it with my left hand. The shoulder twinged a dull ache, but the muscle held perfectly. I looked down at my palm. It was my Patek Philippe watch. You kept this for 2 months, I noted, running my thumb over the leather strap. Then I stopped. The weight was wrong. It was heavier. I looked closer at the watch face. The standard sapphire crystal had been replaced. The new glass was slightly thicker, perfectly clear, but distinctly different. Ballistic-grade transparent aluminum, Vance said casually, leaning against the stainless steel autopsy table. It'll stop a .22 caliber round at point-blank range. You have a terrible habit of putting your hands in front of your face when people shoot at you. Consider it an occupational upgrade. I stared at the $20,000 timepiece that had just been illegally modified to double as a tiny, absurdly expensive bulletproof shield. I looked from the watch to the ruthless, terrifying, beautiful man leaning against my table. There was no apology for the 3 years he had been gone. There were no sweeping, melodramatic declarations of romance. We had moved entirely past the need for them in that dark shipping container at Pier 46. This, a bulletproof watch and a break-in at 2 a.m. was his version of a promise ring. I couldn't help it. A short, sharp laugh escaped my throat. You are a deeply unhinged individual, I said, strapping the watch back onto my left wrist. It felt heavy. It felt right. And yet you're smiling. Vance pointed out that wicked half-smile playing on his own lips. I didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, I walked over to the small kitchenette area I had forced the city to install during the renovations. I picked up a matte black thermos, unscrewed the lid, and poured a cup of coffee. No sugar, no cream. Just the harsh, bitter dark roast he practically lived on. I walked back and handed it to him. Vance took the cup, his fingers brushing deliberately against mine. The contact was electric, grounding me instantly. He took a sip, his dark eyes never leaving my face. Are you done playing with your corpses for the night? Julian, he asked, his voice dropping octaves, slipping into that rough, intimate gravel that made my pulse spike. The dead aren't going anywhere, I replied softly. I didn't step back. I held his gaze, feeling the familiar, intoxicating rush of adrenaline that only he could provoke. For 3 years, I had built my life around avoiding the shadows. Now I realized the shadows were exactly where I belonged as long as I was standing next to the monster who controlled them. I reached past Vance, my hand hovering over the electronic control panel on the wall. You know, I murmured, my eyes locking onto his, the new security system has a manual override. Once the titanium doors are locked from the inside, not even a tactical breach team can get through. Vance's eyes darkened, the lethal predator entirely focused on its prey. Is that an invitation, Doctor? It's an observation, I whispered. I pressed the button. The heavy titanium doors slid shut with a definitive airtight hiss, the deadbolts locking with a heavy, satisfying clank. The morgue was secure. The threat was locked inside with me. And for the first time in my life, I wouldn't have it any other way.